Money doesn't change people, it just reveals who they've been all along. Ethan Cross whispered those words to his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, 30 stories above a city that worshipped his name but would never know his heart. At 34, he'd built an empire worth billions, yet couldn't buy the one thing his money promised to deliver: truth. Everyone around him smiled. Everyone said yes. Everyone loved him, or loved what he could give them. So the tech billionaire made a decision that would shatter everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the price of being seen. He would stop asking people who they were. Instead, he'd give them unlimited power and watch what they chose when they thought no one was looking. I invite you to follow this story to its powerful conclusion. Please like and comment with your city so I can see how far this journey reaches across the world. The morning light filtered through the windows of Cross Tower like liquid gold, painting everything it touched with the illusion of warmth. Ethan Cross stood in his private office on the 42nd floor, staring at 3 identical black cards laid out on his mahogany desk, like accusations waiting to be answered. Each card bore the same message in elegant silver script: no limits, no questions, 3 days. His chief of staff, Marcus Chen, stood near the door with his tablet clutched against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Cross, I have to say this one more time. This experiment is dangerous. If word gets out, it won't." Ethan's voice carried the quiet certainty of a man who'd built his fortune on calculated risks. "That's the point, Marcus. No one knows they're being tested. No cameras they can spot. No obvious surveillance. Just choices made when they think they're free. But 3 people? Simultaneously? The variables? The variables are the point." Ethan turned from the window, his dark eyes sharp with something between determination and desperation. "I've spent 15 years building this company, Marcus. 15 years surrounded by people who tell me exactly what I want to hear. My girlfriend posts about our love story to 2 million followers, but can't remember how I take my coffee. My executive team toasts my vision in meetings, then I hear them on phone calls positioning themselves for the next opportunity. Even my household staff, they're polite, professional, perfect. But I don't know any of them. Not really." Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the raw honesty in his boss's voice. "With respect, sir, that's what money does. It creates distance." "Then I'm going to use money to close it." Ethan picked up one of the black cards, holding it to the light. 3 women, 3 relationships, 3 completely different dynamics. One test that'll show me who they really are when they think I'm not watching. "And if you don't like what you see?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke. Ethan set the card down carefully. "Then at least I'll know the truth." Sloane Vale woke up that morning the way she woke up most mornings, checking her phone before she opened her eyes. Instagram notifications, 8:47. New followers, 1,203. Engagement rate still climbing. She stretched across Egyptian cotton sheets in Ethan's bed, their bed, as she called it in her posts, though she'd only been officially dating him for 8 months. Through the open door of the ensuite bathroom, she could see her ring light already set up, her outfit for the day laid out with the precision of a military operation. "Morning, babe." Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He was already dressed in one of his identical dark suits, looking like he'd been awake for hours. Because he had been. Ethan Cross slept 4 hours a night and called it luxury. Morning." Sloane sat up, instinctively angling her face toward the natural light. Even half awake, she knew her angles. "You're leaving already?" "Early meeting, but I wanted to give you something first." He crossed to the bed and held out a small black box. Sloane's heart jumped. This is it, the ring, finally. She'd been dropping hints for months, getting increasingly less subtle. Her followers were practically demanding an engagement announcement. She opened the box with practiced surprise, only to find not a ring, but a sleek black card. "It's a credit card?" The disappointment in her voice was impossible to hide. Not just any credit card. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, and something in his expression made Sloane pay attention. No limits, no restrictions. 3 days to use it however you want. Consider it an early birthday present. Sloane looked at the card, then at Ethan, then back at the card. "No limits? Like actually no limits?" "Actually no limits." Ethan Cross, you beautiful, generous man. She threw her arms around his neck, already mentally cataloging what she'd buy first. This is amazing. Can I post about it? I'd rather you didn't. His voice carried a note of something she couldn't quite identify. Just enjoy it. Do whatever makes you happy. Whatever makes me happy, Sloane repeated, her mind already racing. For 3 whole days. 3 days. Ethan kissed her forehead and stood. I'll see you tonight. But he wouldn't. That was part of the test. Ethan had cleared his schedule to be mysteriously unavailable, reachable by phone, but too busy to meet. He needed to see what Sloane would do with unlimited resources and no audience. As he left the penthouse, he activated the monitoring system Marcus had built. Not cameras, that would be too obvious, too invasive, but the card would track every purchase, every location, every choice. And Ethan would watch from a distance as the woman he'd called his girlfriend for 8 months showed him who she really was. Harper Knox was already at her desk when Ethan arrived at Cross Tower, which surprised no one. As his executive assistant, Harper treated 7 a.m. like sleeping in. She was usually there by 6, her dark pantsuit perfectly pressed, her desk organized with military precision, her coffee exactly the right temperature because she'd timed the building's elevator schedule down to the second. Morning, Harper. Good morning, Mr. Cross. She didn't look up from her screen, where she was coordinating his calendar with the efficiency of an air traffic controller. Your 9 o'clock with the Singapore investors moved to 10. The board meeting prep is on your desk, and your mother called. I told her you'd call back before lunch. Thank you. Ethan paused at her desk. Do you have a minute? Now Harper looked up, her sharp brown eyes immediately scanning him for crisis signals. In 3 years as his assistant, she'd learned to read his moods like weather patterns. Of course. What do you need? He held out one of the black boxes. Harper's expression didn't change, but Ethan saw the slight tension in her shoulders. Mr. Cross? Open it. She did, with the same careful precision she applied to everything. When she saw the card, her eyes narrowed slightly. I don't understand. It's a gift for 3 years of exceptional work. Ethan kept his voice casual, businesslike. No limits, no restrictions. 3 days. Consider it a bonus. Harper stared at the card like it might explode. This is extremely generous, but unnecessary. I'm well compensated for my work. I know. Take it anyway. May I ask why? It was such a Harper question, direct, slightly suspicious, cutting through any pretense to the real agenda. Ethan smiled despite himself. Because you never take vacations, you work 70-hour weeks, and I want you to do something for yourself. No work, no problem solving for me. Just 3 days of whatever Harper Knox wants to do when she's not managing my life. Something flickered across Harper's face. Surprise, maybe, or something more complicated. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Then learn. Ethan turned toward his office. That's an order, by the way. For the next 3 days, you're off the clock. Enjoy yourself. As his door closed behind him, Harper sat very still, staring at the black card in her hand. Her mind, always strategic, always 3 steps ahead, began calculating possibilities. Not for pleasure. Harper Knox didn't think in terms of pleasure. She thought in terms of opportunity. And unlimited resources for 3 days represented an opportunity she'd be foolish to waste. Rosa Hale heard about the cards from the other side of a door she was cleaning. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. Rosa never meant to eavesdrop. But when you cleaned houses for a living, you became part of the furniture. Invisible, silent, present, but not present. People talked around you like you weren't there, and most of the time, Rosa preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety. She was dusting the bookshelves in Mr. Cross's study, the ones no one ever touched, filled with first editions he'd bought but never read, when she heard his voice in the hallway. Rosa, do you have a moment? Her heart jumped. In 2 years of working in the Cross penthouse, Mr. Cross had spoken directly to her maybe a dozen times. Usually, he communicated through Marcus or simply left notes. Rosa had assumed that was how rich people preferred it, keeping the help at a comfortable distance. She set down her dusting cloth and smoothed her uniform. Yes, Mr. Cross? He stepped into the study holding one of those black boxes, and Rosa's first thought was, I'm being fired. Rich people always dress bad news up in fancy packaging. But Mr. Cross wasn't frowning. If anything, he looked uncertain, like he wasn't quite sure what he was doing. I wanted to give you something. He held out the box. Rosa stared at it. Sir? Open it. Her hands were shaking slightly as she took the box. She'd cleaned Mr. Cross's home for 2 years, dusted his books, washed his windows, organized his closets, but she'd never taken anything that wasn't hers. The box felt heavy with more than its physical weight. Inside was a black card with silver writing, no limits, no questions. 3 days. I don't understand, Rosa whispered. It's a credit card. You can use it for anything you need, anything you want, for 3 days. Mr. Cross's voice was gentle, which somehow made everything more confusing. No restrictions, no limits. Rosa's mind went immediately to practical things. The rent that was due, the medical bills from her mother's hospital stay last month, the leak in her apartment ceiling that her landlord kept ignoring. But then she looked at Mr. Cross's face and saw something there that made her pause. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Because you work hard. Because you deserve something good. He smiled slightly. And because I want you to have it. Rosa wanted to argue, wanted to say this was too much, too generous, that she couldn't possibly accept something so extravagant from someone she barely knew. But the truth was, Rosa Hale had been poor for so long that she'd forgotten how to turn down help when it was offered. Thank you, she managed. Thank you so much, Mr. Cross. You're welcome, Rosa. He turned to leave, then paused. And Rosa, please don't spend the next 3 days cleaning. Do something for yourself. When he left, Rosa stood in the study for a long time, holding the card and trying not to cry. By noon on the first day, Ethan had retreated to a private monitoring room Marcus had set up in a secured office 3 floors below the executive suite. 3 screens showed 3 sets of data, not video feeds, but purchase records, location data, credit card transactions updating in real time. You're sure they can't tell they're being tracked? Ethan asked. Marcus nodded. The cards look identical to our Platinum business cards. The tracking is built into the chip, standard security feature that most people don't even know exists. As far as they know, they're just spending money. Just spending money, Ethan echoed. He pulled up a chair and settled in to watch. Sloan Vale's spending started at 10:47 a.m., $12,000 at Bergdorf Goodman, $8,500 at Cartier, $15,000 at a private jeweler in the Diamond District. By 2 p.m., she'd dropped $67,000, and she was just getting started. Ethan watched the numbers climb with a strange detachment. He'd expected this, hadn't he? Sloan was an influencer. Her entire life was about image, about showing her followers a lifestyle they aspired to. Of course she'd spend money on luxury goods. But then Marcus pulled up her social media feeds and Ethan saw something that made his stomach turn. Sloan had posted 17 times since leaving the penthouse. Every post featured her newest purchases, carefully styled and photographed. But it wasn't the materialism that bothered him. It was the caption on her most recent post, a photo of her holding shopping bags with a brilliant smile. When your man treats you like the queen you are, some people are just born generous. Blessed, luxury life. #treat yourself. Billionaire girlfriend. 2 million people had liked it in 3 hours. The comments were a flood of emojis and congratulations. But nowhere, not in a single post, not in a single caption, had Sloan mentioned Ethan's name. Just your man, just some people. Like he was a credit card with a heartbeat. Marcus cleared his throat quietly. Sir, are you okay? Fine. Ethan's voice was flat. What about Harper? Harper Knox's spending pattern was completely different. Where Sloan's purchases were frequent and expensive, Harper's were strategic and calculated. At 11 a.m., she'd spent $5,000 on tickets to an exclusive tech industry mixer happening that evening. At 1 p.m., another $3,000 on a designer outfit. Not flashy, but the kind of perfectly tailored power suit that screamed executive presence. By 3 p.m., she was at the mixer, and Marcus had managed to access the guest list. "She's networking," he said, pulling up names. "These are major players, CEOs, venture capitalists, hedge fund managers, people who could hire her away from me," Ethan finished. He leaned back in his chair, watching Harper's location data ping across Manhattan's financial district. "She's positioning herself." "You told her to do something for herself," Marcus pointed out. "Maybe this is what success looks like for Harper Knox." Maybe it was. Harper had always been ambitious. That's what made her so good at her job. She anticipated needs, solved problems, executed plans with ruthless efficiency. Of course, she'd use unlimited resources to advance her career, but there was something cold about it, something transactional. Ethan had given her a gift with no strings attached, and Harper had immediately turned it into a career move. Not because she wanted to leave. Harper loved her job, loved the challenge, loved being indispensable. But because she was always thinking 3 steps ahead, always building her next opportunity, always treating relationships like chess pieces to be positioned for maximum advantage. Ethan thought about the last time he'd asked Harper a personal question. He couldn't remember. In 3 years, their relationship had been perfectly professional, efficient, effective, and completely devoid of actual connection. "What about Rosa?" he asked quietly. Rosa Hale's data was almost non-existent. By 4 p.m. on the first day, she'd spent a total of $247. Groceries at a local market, cash withdrawal at an ATM. One transaction at a medical supply store that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. "That's it?" Ethan stared at the screen. "She has unlimited funds and she's buying groceries?" Marcus pulled up the location data. "She went home after leaving your penthouse, stayed there for 2 hours, then went to the market, the medical supply store, and..." He frowned. "This address is listed as a community center in her neighborhood." Ethan leaned forward. "Can you find out what she did there?" "Not without more invasive surveillance, which you specifically said you didn't want." Marcus met his eyes. "We can track purchases and locations, but we can't see inside buildings or read minds. If you want to know what Rosa Hale is doing, you'll have to ask her." But Ethan couldn't ask her. That would compromise the entire test. He sat back, staring at Rosa's minimal spending pattern, and felt something unexpected. Curiosity mixed with shame. He'd given Rosa the same gift he'd given Sloane and Harper: unlimited resources, no restrictions, total freedom. Sloane had treated it like a shopping spree. Harper had turned it into a networking opportunity. And Rosa had spent $247 on groceries and disappeared into her neighborhood. What did that mean? The second day brought revelations that cracked Ethan's careful detachment like ice under pressure. Sloane's spending accelerated. By noon, she'd organized a yacht party in the Hudson. $35,000 for the rental, another $20,000 for catering, $15,000 for a celebrity DJ. Her Instagram stories showed her surrounded by people Ethan didn't recognize, all of them drinking champagne and dancing while Sloane held court like a queen among her subjects. She invited 50 people, Marcus reported, scanning the guest list Sloane had posted publicly. Influencers, models, a few minor celebrities, not one person from your life, not your friends, not your business associates. This is her party, built with your money, celebrating her. Ethan watched the videos with a strange numbness. In every shot, Sloane was radiant, laughing, dancing, posing for photos. She looked happier than he'd seen her in months, and he wasn't there. More than that, she hadn't even invited him, hadn't texted to ask if he wanted to join, hadn't mentioned the party at all. The worst part came at 3 p.m., when Sloane posted a video from the yacht. She was sitting on a white leather couch, surrounded by friends, answering questions from her followers in a live Q&A. Someone asked, "How did you afford this amazing party?" Sloane's smile was brilliant and empty. "Let's just say I have very generous friends. When you're living your best life, the universe provides, you know?" The universe. Not Ethan. Not, "My boyfriend surprised me." Just the universe, like money appeared by magic to people who manifested it properly. Marcus turned off the feed without being asked. "I'm sorry, sir." "Don't be." Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. "This is exactly what I needed to see." Harper Knox's second day was a masterclass in strategic networking. She'd turned the tech mixer into a 3-day intensive course in building influence. Breakfast meetings with venture capitalists, lunch with a CEO who was expanding his executive team, afternoon coffee with a headhunter who specialized in placing high-level assistants at Fortune 500 companies. Every meeting was purchased with Ethan's card. Every conversation was carefully documented in Harper's perfectly organized notes. And every interaction was designed to position Harper Knox as someone worth knowing, someone worth investing in. "She's not being disloyal," Marcus said carefully, watching Harper's calendar fill up with networking appointments. "She's being pragmatic. This is how you build a career in this industry." By treating a gift like a business investment, Ethan's tone was sharper than he intended. By using someone else's resources to build your exit strategy, you told her to do something for herself. For Harper, this is what ambition looks like. Ethan knew Marcus was right. Harper had never pretended to be anything other than what she was. Brilliant, ambitious, and focused on building a career that would outlast any single position. But watching her turn his gift into a professional networking opportunity felt like confirmation of something he'd suspected but never wanted to acknowledge. Harper Knox was loyal to her own success first, and everything else was secondary. She'd never leave as long as his position offered her the best opportunity. But the moment something better came along, the moment someone offered her more money, more prestige, more power, Harper would leave without looking back. "What about Rosa?" Ethan asked, desperate for something that didn't feel like betrayal dressed in business casual. Rosa Hale's second day was a mystery wrapped in small purchases in unexplained locations. $89 at a children's store, $156 at a medical clinic, $200 cash withdrawal. Another trip to the community center, a stop at a small restaurant that Marcus identified as a family-owned Dominican place in Rosa's neighborhood. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus muttered, pulling up Rosa's spending history. "She has unlimited funds, and she's spending like someone on a tight budget. The most expensive single purchase she's made is $200, and we can't even track where that cash went." Ethan stared at the data, feeling something shift in his chest. "Pull up her employee file." Marcus did, and they read through it together. Rosa Hale, age 34. Born in the Dominican Republic, immigrated with her family at age 12. High school diploma, no college. 2 years with Cross Household Services. Performance reviews consistently excellent, reliable, thorough, professional. Emergency contact, Maria Hale, mother. Single mother? Ethan asked. File doesn't say. No children listed in her benefits paperwork. Marcus frowned. But that doesn't mean much. A lot of our household staff support extended family members who aren't technically dependents. Ethan thought about Rosa's face when he'd given her the card. That flash of hope mixed with fear, like someone who'd been disappointed so many times that generosity felt like a trap. He thought about her hands shaking as she opened the box. He thought about the way she'd whispered, "Why?" Like the concept of receiving something for nothing was completely foreign. And he thought about $247 spent across 2 days while Sloan burned through hundreds of thousands like kindling. "I want to know what she's doing," Ethan said quietly. "Not invasive surveillance, just, I want to understand." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, if I may, this test was supposed to show you who these women are when they think you're not watching. If you start asking questions, you compromise the entire experiment." "I know." Ethan stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something other than sit in this sterile room watching numbers on screens. "But I also know that Sloan is throwing parties for strangers with my money, and Harper is building her exit strategy. Rosa Hale is the only person who's surprising me, and I don't even understand what she's doing." "Maybe that's the point," Marcus said softly. "Maybe some people don't make sense from a distance. Maybe some people you have to actually meet." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The third day was when everything broke. Sloan woke up in the yacht's master suite at 11 a.m., took a photo of herself in bed with the caption, "Living my dream life," and was at Tiffany's by 1 p.m. She bought a $45,000 diamond bracelet and immediately posted it with 3 different outfit combinations, asking her followers which look was best. By 3 p.m., she'd added $89,000 to her spending total, and Ethan sat in the monitoring room feeling something he rarely felt: disgust. Not at the spending, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But at the performance of it all, the way Sloane had turned his gesture into content, the way she'd invited the entire internet into their relationship except him. He pulled out his phone and called her. Sloane answered on the third ring, slightly breathless. "Babe, hi. I was just thinking about you." "Were you?" His voice was flat enough that she should have noticed. "Of course. This has been such an amazing few days. You're so generous, you know that? I've been telling everyone, well, not everyone, but people are asking where I got this gorgeous bracelet, and I'm like, I have the best boyfriend ever. And Sloane," he cut through her monologue, "did you think about inviting me to the yacht party?" A pause. "What?" "The yacht party, yesterday. 50 people on a boat I paid for. Did you think about inviting me?" "Oh my God, babe, you're so busy. I didn't want to bother you with something so random. It was just like a fun day with friends." "I wasn't too busy. You didn't ask." Another pause, longer this time. When Sloane spoke again, her voice had an edge. "Are you seriously mad at me right now? You gave me a card and told me to do whatever I wanted. That's what I'm doing." "You're right," Ethan said quietly. "I told you to do whatever made you happy, and now I know what that is." "Ethan," he hung up. He got. Harper Knox was in the middle of a power lunch at Per Se when her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "We need to talk. My office. 6 p.m. She read it 3 times, her strategic mind immediately running scenarios. The text was professionally phrased, but carried an undertone she recognized. This wasn't a meeting about schedules or board presentations. This was personal. Harper excused herself from lunch early, went home to change, and arrived at Cross Tower at exactly 5:55 p.m. She'd learned long ago that arriving early was respectful, arriving on time was expected, and arriving late was unacceptable. Ethan was standing at his window when she entered, silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline like a figure in a painting. "Close the door, Harper." She did, her heart rate picking up slightly. "Mr. Cross? How was your lunch with David Chen?" Ethan didn't turn around. Harper's mind raced. David Chen was the CEO of a competing tech firm, someone she'd strategically connected with at the mixer. "It was productive. He's an interesting person." "Interesting enough to offer you a job?" Now her heart stopped. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Ethan turned, and his expression was neither angry nor cold, just tired. "I gave you 3 days to do something for yourself, Harper. You turned it into a job search." "That's not—" Harper stopped herself. Lying would be worse than the truth. "I networked. That's what professionals do. Building connections isn't betrayal." "Building connections with my competitors while planning your exit strategy? That's not networking, Harper. That's positioning yourself for the next opportunity." "And that's wrong?" Her voice sharpened with frustration. "You've taught me everything I know about being strategic, about thinking ahead, about building value. I'm doing exactly what you do in my position." "Maybe." Ethan walked to his desk and picked up one of the black cards. Harper's card. "But I wouldn't do it with someone else's resources, and I wouldn't pretend it was anything other than what it was." Harper's face flushed. "You told me to take 3 days for myself. You said do whatever I wanted. I did exactly that." "You did." Ethan set the card down. "And now I know exactly what you want. Thank you for being honest, even if you didn't realize you were." The dismissal in his tone cut deeper than Harper expected. She'd always prided herself on being professional, on keeping emotions separate from business. But standing in Ethan's office, watching him look at her like a stranger, she felt something crack inside her carefully constructed armor. "Are you firing me?" "No." Ethan's voice softened slightly. "You're excellent at your job, Harper. I'm not going to fire you for being ambitious, but I'm also not going to pretend we have anything more than a professional relationship. You've made it very clear where your loyalties lie." "With myself," Harper said quietly. "That's where they lie, because that's the only safe place." For a moment, something passed between them, Recognition, maybe, or mutual understanding of a loneliness neither of them knew how to fix. Then Harper straightened her spine, nodded once, and left the office with her dignity intact and her heart unexpectedly bruised. Rosa Hale received no phone call, no summons, no dramatic confrontation. She spent her third day the way she'd spent the previous two, quietly, purposefully, invisibly. But Ethan was done watching from a distance. At 4 p.m., he told Marcus to find Rosa's address, got in his car, and drove to a neighborhood he'd never visited before. A part of Queens where the buildings were old, the streets were crowded, and the American dream looked more like survival than success. Rosa's apartment building was a 5-story walk-up with peeling paint and a broken intercom. Ethan climbed to the 3rd floor and knocked on door 3C, feeling completely out of place in his $1,000 suit. Rosa opened the door, saw him, and went pale. "Mr. Cross, is something wrong? Did I do something?" "No." He held up his hands. "Nothing's wrong. I wanted to talk to you. May I come in?" She let him in because what else could she do? Her apartment was tiny. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen combined, with a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was spotlessly clean, and Ethan could see small touches everywhere. Fresh flowers in a jar, photographs arranged carefully on one wall, a handmade quilt folded neatly on the couch. "I'm sorry it's so small," Rosa said automatically. "I wasn't expecting, I didn't know you'd—" "Rosa." Ethan's voice was gentle. "You don't need to apologize. Your home is lovely." She stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Ethan took a breath. "I need to be honest with you about something. The card I gave you, it wasn't just a gift. I was tracking how you spent the money, all 3 of you, Sloan, Harper, and you." Rosa's face went from pale to gray. "You were watching me?" "Not watching, just tracking purchases. I wanted to see who the people in my life really were when they thought no one was paying attention." He felt the shame of it now, standing in her small apartment. "It was manipulative and unfair, and I'm sorry." She sank onto the couch, holding herself very still. "So you know. I know you spent $247 in 3 days when you could have spent anything. I know you went to a community center, a medical clinic, a children's store. I know you withdrew cash that I can't track." Ethan sat carefully in the one chair, keeping distance between them. "What I don't know is why. Rosa, you could have paid off debt, bought yourself something beautiful, taken a vacation. Why did you spend almost nothing?" For a long moment, Rosa was silent. Then she started talking, her voice quiet but steady. "The first day, I used the card to buy groceries for Mrs. Chen in 3A. She's 87 and her daughter sends money, but not enough. She was going to skip meals to pay for her blood pressure medication, so I bought both, the medicine and a month of groceries." Ethan listened without interrupting. "The second day, I went to the community center where my niece and nephew go after school. The program was going to shut down because they couldn't afford supplies. I bought art materials, books, sports equipment. Not expensive things, just things kids need." "And the children's store?" Ethan asked softly. "My neighbor's daughter needed shoes. She was wearing sneakers 2 sizes too small because her mom works 3 jobs and still can't make rent. I bought her shoes that fit and a winter coat because it's getting cold." "The cash withdrawal?" Rosa's eyes met his, and he saw something fierce there. "A teenager in my building is trying to stay in school while taking care of his sick father. He needed money for textbooks and medication. I gave him cash so he wouldn't have to choose between his education and his dad's health." The apartment was very quiet. "The medical clinic?" Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "My mother needs cataract surgery. She's been on a waiting list for 2 years because we can't afford the private clinic. I made an appointment and put down a deposit." Rosa's hands twisted in her lap. "That was the most I spent on anyone, $156. I kept thinking about what you said, about doing something for myself. But then I thought about my mom not being able to see clearly, and I couldn't keep that money when I knew people who needed it more." Ethan couldn't speak. He sat in that small apartment, looking at this woman he'd seen almost every day for 2 years but never really known, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what wealth actually meant. "Why didn't you spend more?" he finally asked. You could have helped so many more people. You could have, because it wasn't my money, Rosa interrupted gently. It was yours. You gave me 3 days, not my whole life. I used what I needed to help the people right in front of me. That felt honest. She paused. Was I supposed to do something else? Is that why you're here? Did I fail your test? No. Ethan's throat was tight. No, Rosa. You didn't fail anything. She nodded slowly, still looking uncertain. Can I ask you something, Mr. Cross? Please, and call me Ethan. Why did you give us those cards? What were you really testing? Ethan thought about Sloane's yacht party, Harper's networking lunch, the way both of them had turned his gesture into something transactional. Then he looked at Rosa's small apartment with its careful flowers and handmade quilt, at this woman who'd been given unlimited resources and chose to buy shoes for a neighbor's child. I was testing who people were when they thought no one was watching, he said quietly. I was lonely, Rosa, surrounded by people but completely alone, because I couldn't tell who actually saw me and who just saw my money. So I gave 3 people unlimited power and watched what they chose. He smiled sadly. Sloane chose performance, Harper chose ambition, and you chose everyone but yourself. Is that bad? No. Ethan stood, suddenly unable to sit still. But it's not good either. Rosa, you had 3 days with unlimited resources, and you spent less than $500. You helped your neighbors, your family, people in your community, all beautiful, generous things. But you didn't buy yourself even one thing that made you happy, not one thing just for you. Rosa looked down. I did, though. What? I bought flowers. She gestured to the jar on her small table. Fresh flowers from the market. I always want them, but they're expensive and they die so quickly, so I buy them maybe twice a year. Her smile was small and private. I bought fresh flowers, and I'm going to have them all week. That made me happy. Ethan looked at the flowers. $12, maybe $15 worth of simple blooms in a recycled jar. And he thought about the $89,000 diamond bracelet Sloane had bought that same day. I need to go, he said abruptly, his mind racing with revelations he wasn't quite ready to process. But, Rosa, thank you for being honest with me, and for showing me. He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Showing you what? That some people still choose other people over the money, even when no one's watching. He left her apartment and sat in his car for 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel and trying to understand what he was feeling. The test was over. He had his answers. Sloane Vale was everything he'd feared, beautiful, charming, and completely hollow. A performance artist who loved the idea of a billionaire boyfriend, but had no interest in the actual human being attached to the bank account. Harper Knox was exactly who she'd always been, brilliant, strategic, and loyal only to her own advancement, professional to the core and warm as a spreadsheet. And Rosa Hale. Rosa Hale had taken unlimited power and used it to buy flowers for herself and shoes for a child she barely knew. Ethan drove back to Manhattan with his hands tight on the wheel and the uncomfortable realization that he'd just learned something about himself he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The person who'd shown him the most truth wasn't the girlfriend or the executive assistant. It was the woman he'd spent 2 years not seeing at all. The board meeting started at 9 the next morning, and Ethan Cross walked into the conference room like a man who'd stopped pretending to care about the performance. His executive team noticed immediately, the way he sat down without the usual pleasantries, the way his eyes seemed to look through people instead of at them, the subtle shift in his energy that suggested something fundamental had changed overnight. Let's make this quick, Ethan said, cutting off the CFO's prepared opening remarks. Harper, status update on the Singapore deal. Harper stood, her presentation flawless as always, her voice steady and professional. But there was something different in the way she looked at him, a careful distance, a recalibration of their dynamic that everyone in the room could feel even if they couldn't name it. The investors are requesting a face-to-face meeting next month. I've prepared 3 possible schedules based on your availability and their preferred dates. We should also consider... Send me the options. I'll decide this afternoon. Ethan's interruption was polite but final. What else? Harper's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In 3 years, Ethan had never cut her off mid-presentation. That's all I have unless you want to discuss the logistics now. Not necessary. Thank you, Harper. She sat down, and Ethan saw the flash of something in her eyes. Hurt, maybe, or anger, or the recognition that their carefully balanced professional relationship had tilted into something colder and more distant. He should have felt guilty. Instead, he felt nothing but a strange clarity. The meeting continued with brutal efficiency. No small talk, no extended discussions, no opportunity for anyone to perform their loyalty or competence. Ethan asked direct questions, received direct answers, and dismissed people the moment they stopped being useful. By 9:45, the conference room was empty except for Marcus, who lingered near the door with an expression that suggested he had thoughts he wasn't sure he should share. "Say it," Ethan told him. "You're different." "I learned something." "About the three women?" "About everyone." Ethan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had once felt like his kingdom and now felt like a stage full of actors reading lines. "I've spent 15 years building relationships based on what people could do for me or what I could do for them. Transactional, strategic, professional, and I called it success." Marcus joined him at the window. "It is success. That's how business works." "Business, yes, but I'm not just a business, Marcus. I'm a person. And I forgot that people who only know how to transact can't actually connect." Ethan's voice was quiet, but certain. "Sloan, Harper, they're not villains. They're just doing exactly what I taught them to do. Perform. Position. Take what you can get while the getting is good." "And Rosa Hale?" "Rosa Hale spent less than $500 in 3 days and changed my entire understanding of what it means to have something worth giving." Ethan turned from the window. "I need you to do something for me. Anything. Fire me." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Not literally, but I need you to clear my schedule for the next week. Cancel everything that isn't life or death critical. Tell people I'm dealing with a personal matter. Tell them whatever you need to tell them." Ethan's expression was more serious than Marcus had seen in years. "I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not performing success." "Mr. Cross..." "Ethan, are you okay?" "No," Ethan said honestly, "but I'm going to be." Sloan Vale's phone rang at 10:30, and she answered it with the breathless enthusiasm of someone who'd already rehearsed her apology. "Babe, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, and you're totally right. I should have invited you to the party. It was thoughtless, and I'm sorry, and I want to make it up to you. What if we..." "Sloan," Ethan's voice was calm, almost gentle. "We need to talk. In person. Can you come to the penthouse this afternoon?" The shift in his tone made her pause. "Is everything okay?" "Just come at 2, please." He hung up before she could ask more questions, leaving Sloan staring at her phone with the growing realization that something was wrong. Very wrong. She spent the next 3 hours spiraling through possibilities. Was he breaking up with her? Was he angry about the spending? Had someone told him something? Her mind raced through every interaction, every post, every moment of the last 3 days, looking for the mistake that would explain the coldness in his voice. By the time she arrived at the penthouse at exactly 2 o'clock, she'd decided on her strategy. Apologize beautifully, promise to do better, remind him why they were good together. She'd worn his favorite dress, the blue one that photographed well and made her eyes look incredible. She'd practiced her apology in the elevator. But when Ethan opened the door, the look on his face told her that no apology was going to fix this. "Come in," he said quietly. The penthouse felt different, colder somehow, despite the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Sloan followed Ethan to the living room, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her confidence evaporating with each step. "Sit down, Sloan." She sat on the white leather couch where they'd had breakfast 1,000 times, where she'd filmed countless Instagram stories, where they'd laughed and kissed and pretended to be a couple in love. Ethan sat across from her in the chair, maintaining careful distance. "I gave you that card as a test," he said without preamble. "I wanted to see who you were when you thought I wasn't watching." Sloane's blood went cold. "A test?" "I tracked every purchase, every location, every choice you made over 3 days." His voice held no anger, which somehow made it worse. "I saw the yacht party you didn't invite me to. I saw the designer shopping sprees you posted about without mentioning my name. I saw you turn my gesture into content for your followers while treating me like a credit card that occasionally takes you to dinner. That's not... I didn't... Sloane's voice cracked. Ethan, I was just having fun. You told me to do whatever made me happy. I did. And now I know what makes you happy. He leaned forward, and for the first time, Sloane saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Not anger, but something sadder. It's not me, Sloane. It's what I can give you. The lifestyle. The access. The ability to post photos that make your followers jealous. You're not dating me. You're dating my bank account and calling it love. That's not fair. Tears started to well in her eyes, and Sloane wasn't even sure if they were real or performed. I care about you. I do. Maybe I got carried away with the spending, but that doesn't mean I don't have feelings. What's my favorite book? The question came out of nowhere. Sloane stared at him. What? My favorite book. We've been dating for 8 months. What's my favorite book? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried to remember if she'd ever asked, if he'd ever mentioned it, if there was any moment in 8 months where she'd been curious enough about Ethan Cross as a person to learn something that couldn't be Googled or posted about. I don't know, she whispered. It's East of Eden, Steinbeck. I've read it 11 times. Ethan's voice was painfully gentle. What's my mother's name? Sloane felt panic rising. You never talk about your family. Her name is Caroline. She lives in Boston. She called 3 times last week and I missed every call because I was working. He paused. You've never asked about her. Not once. Ethan, that's not... I just thought you were private about that stuff. What do I drink in the morning? Not coffee. The other thing. Sloane's mind went blank. She'd seen him drink something every morning. Something in a tall glass that wasn't coffee. Something she'd noticed peripherally but never bothered to identify because it didn't matter for the aesthetic of their breakfast photos. I don't know, she said again, and this time the tears were real, not because she loved him, but because she was losing something valuable and she didn't know how to stop it. Green juice, kale, spinach, apple, ginger. I've had it every morning for 6 years. Ethan stood up, and Sloane recognized finality in the gesture. You don't know me, Sloane. You know my credit limit and my social media value, and what dating me does for your brand. But you don't know me. I can learn. She stood too, desperate now. I can do better. I'll delete the posts. I'll pay you back for everything I spent. I'll be whoever you want me to be. That's the problem. Ethan's smile was sad. I don't want you to be anyone other than who you are. But I also can't keep pretending that who you are is someone who actually sees me. He walked to the door and held it open. You can keep the bracelet and the clothes. Consider them severance pay for 8 months of performing a relationship. Sloane walked to the door on legs that felt disconnected from her body. At the threshold, she turned back. Was any of it real for you? Ethan thought about that question for a long moment. I wanted it to be. I think we both did. But wanting isn't the same as doing the work to make it true. He touched her shoulder gently, the most genuine physical contact they'd had in weeks. You're going to be fine, Sloane. You're beautiful and charming, and your followers love you. Just maybe next time, try to love the person you're with more than the lifestyle they can give you. She left without another word, and Ethan closed the door behind her. He stood in the silent penthouse and felt nothing but relief. Harper Knox was harder. She knocked on his office door at precisely 5 o'clock, as requested by his cryptic afternoon message. She'd spent the day in a state of controlled anxiety, maintaining perfect professional composure while internally cataloging every possible scenario that could result from a private late-day meeting with her boss. Come in, Harper. She entered to find Ethan sitting not behind his desk, but in the informal seating area near the window, 2 chairs facing each other with a small table between them. Coffee was already poured. It felt like a setup for a conversation she didn't want to have. Close the door and sit down. Harper did, her spine straight, her expression neutral. Whatever was coming, she would face it with dignity. I owe you an apology, Ethan began, and Harper felt her carefully constructed defenses falter. She'd prepared for accusations, confrontation, even termination. She hadn't prepared for an apology. You don't, I do. Ethan picked up his coffee, but didn't drink it. The card was a test. I tracked your spending, your meetings, your networking. It was manipulative and it violated your privacy. And I'm sorry. Harper's mind raced through implications. You tracked all of us, Sloan, me, Rosa. Yes, and what did you learn? That you're exactly who you've always been. Ethan met her eyes directly. Brilliant, strategic, ambitious, and completely focused on building a career that will outlast any single position, including this one. Harper's jaw tightened. Is that a criticism? It's an observation, and it's not wrong, Harper. Ambition isn't a character flaw. Strategic thinking isn't betrayal. You took the resources I gave you and used them to position yourself for future opportunities. That's smart. He set down his coffee. But it's also lonely. Excuse me? You spent 3 days networking with my competitors, building relationships with people who could hire you away from me, positioning yourself as someone worth investing in. All intelligent career moves. Ethan leaned forward. But you didn't spend a single dollar on anything that wasn't strategic. Not a book you wanted to read, not a meal just because it looked good. Not one moment where you did something purely because it made you happy. Every choice was calculated for maximum professional benefit. Harper felt heat rise in her chest, anger mixed with something more complicated. You told me to do something for myself. That's what I did. My career is myself. Is it? Or is your career the armor you wear so you don't have to be yourself? The question hit harder than Harper expected. She stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to not be pinned under his perceptive gaze. You don't know anything about me. I know you've worked for me for 3 years, and I couldn't tell you your favorite color. I know you're the most competent person I've ever met, and I've never heard you laugh. I know you're always 3 steps ahead, and you've never once been present. Ethan's voice was gentle but relentless. I know that when I gave you unlimited resources and told you to do something for yourself, you couldn't imagine anything that wasn't about positioning yourself for the next opportunity. Because that's survival. Harper turned on him, and for the first time in 3 years, her professional mask cracked. Because I grew up watching my mother smile at men who treated her like furniture, watching her defer and apologize and make herself small so she could keep her job and feed her kids. I learned that the only person who would take care of me was me, and the only way to be safe was to be indispensable. Her voice shook slightly. So yes, I network, I position, I think 3 steps ahead. Because the moment I stop being the most valuable person in the room is the moment I become disposable. The silence between them felt like broken glass. Harper, Ethan stood slowly. You're not disposable. You never have been. Everyone's disposable. She turned back to the window, her reflection sharp in the darkening glass. The difference is, some of us admit it and plan accordingly. Is that really what you think? That I'd discard you the moment someone better came along? Wouldn't you? Harper's laugh was bitter. You just told me you tracked my every move because you wanted to know who I really was. You tested me like I was a variable in an experiment, and now you're upset because I passed the test by being exactly who you taught me to be, strategic, efficient, and always thinking about the next move. Ethan absorbed that accusation and found he couldn't deny it. You're right. I did teach you that. I built a company culture where being strategic was rewarded and being vulnerable was weakness. I created an environment where everyone performed success instead of actually connecting. He walked to stand beside her at the window. But that doesn't mean I want to keep living like that. Harper finally looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his expression that surprised her. Not anger or disappointment, regret. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want you to leave, but I also don't want you to stay if the only reason is that I'm your best strategic option right now. Ethan's voice was steady. I want to work with someone who's here because they want to be here, not because they're calculating when a better offer will come along. And I don't think that's you anymore, Harper, if it ever was. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself, to explain that loyalty and strategy weren't mutually exclusive, that caring about her career didn't mean she didn't care about her work. But the truth was more complicated. She did care about her work. She cared about it so much that she'd forgotten how to care about anything else. including the people she worked with. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "That's up to you." Ethan turned from the window. "You can stay. You're still the best assistant I've ever had, and nothing about this conversation changes your value to the company. But if you do stay, I need you to be honest about why. Not with me, with yourself." Harper nodded slowly, her mind already working through scenarios, calculating outcomes, thinking 3 steps ahead because that's what she did even when she was trying not to do it. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need." Ethan walked toward his desk, then paused. "Harper, for what it's worth, I hope you stay, but I hope more that you figure out who you are when you're not performing competence." She left his office with her professional composure intact and her internal world in chaos. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Harper Knox, who never cried, who never broke, who never let emotion interfere with strategic thinking, pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of something that felt dangerously close to grief. Then she pulled herself together and drove home to her immaculate apartment where everything was organized and nothing was personal. And she sat on her designer couch in the dark and asked herself a question she'd been avoiding for years. If she wasn't building a career, who was she? She didn't have an answer. Rosa Hale received no summons, no phone call, no cryptic message. She simply showed up for work the next morning at 7:30, the way she always did, and let herself into the penthouse with her key. Ethan was in the kitchen making green juice, and when he saw her, something in his expression made Rosa freeze in the doorway. "Rosa, good morning." "Good morning, Mr. Cross." She set down her cleaning supplies, suddenly uncertain. Should I come back later?" "No, actually I was hoping to talk to you." He poured the green mixture into a glass and took a sip, then made a face. "I've been drinking this for 6 years and I still think it tastes like lawn clippings." Rosa didn't know what to say to that. "Sit down," Ethan said, gesturing to the kitchen island. "Please." She sat because he'd asked, but everything in her body language suggested she expected to be fired. Ethan saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands twisted in her lap, the careful blankness in her expression that came from years of making herself invisible. "I'm not firing you," he said immediately, and saw some of the tension release. "I wanted to thank you and apologize." "Apologize?" Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. "For testing you. For tracking your spending. For treating you like an experiment instead of a person." Ethan set down his juice and leaned against the counter, maintaining distance so she wouldn't feel crowded. "What you did with that card, helping your neighbors, your family, people in your community, it made me realize how completely I've lost perspective on what actually matters." Rosa looked down at her hands. "I didn't do anything special." "That's the problem. You think taking care of people who need help isn't special. You think spending 3 days making other people's lives better while barely spending anything on yourself is just normal." Ethan's voice was gentle but intense. "Rosa, most people given unlimited resources for 3 days would spend it on themselves. You spend it on everyone but yourself. That's not normal. That's extraordinary." "I bought flowers," she said quietly. "For me. That counts." $12 worth of flowers when you could have bought anything in the world. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her, bringing himself to her level. "Rosa, why didn't you spend more? Not on other people. On yourself. Why didn't you buy something that made you happy?" She was quiet for so long that Ethan thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of a lifetime of learned scarcity. "My grandmother used to say that some people are born to receive and some people are born to give. She said the givers have to be careful because the world will take and take until there's nothing left." Rosa looked up, and her eyes were clear and sad. "I used to think I was a giver, but after she died, I realized I was just someone who'd never learned how to keep anything for herself, because keeping things felt selfish when other people needed them more." "That's not generosity," Ethan said softly. "That's self-erasure." "Maybe," she smiled slightly, "but it's also survival. When you grow up poor, you learn that things don't last. Money comes and goes. Possessions get lost or stolen or fall apart. But people remember when you helped them. They remember when you showed up, and sometimes when things get really bad, they help you back. She paused. That card you gave me? I knew it wouldn't last. 3 days, you said. So I used it for things that would matter after the 3 days were over. Mrs. Chen's groceries will last a month. The community center's supplies will help kids all year. My neighbor's daughter has shoes that fit and a coat that's warm. And my mother, her voice caught. My mother is going to see clearly again. Ethan felt something break open in his chest. What about you, Rosa? What do you get out of all that giving? I get to see people smile. I get to know I made a difference, even if it's small. She met his eyes directly. I get to feel like I matter, Mr. Cross. Not because I'm rich or important or powerful, but because I showed up when people needed help. They sat in silence for a long moment, the morning light streaming through the windows of a penthouse that suddenly felt less like a fortress and more like a starting point. I want to change things, Ethan said finally. Not just my life, everything. The way I live, the way I spend money, the way I see people. But I don't know how to do it alone. Rosa tilted her head slightly. What are you asking? I'm asking if you'd help me. Not as my housekeeper, as someone who understands what actually matters. Someone who can teach me how to see the world the way you do. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I can't pay you enough for that kind of wisdom, Rosa, but I can offer you a different position. A partnership, maybe. Working with me to figure out how to use resources to actually help people, instead of just accumulating more of what I don't need. She stared at him like he'd suggested they fly to the moon. I clean houses, Mr. Cross. I don't know anything about business or partnerships or... You know about people. You know about community. You know about making choices that matter instead of choices that just feel good in the moment. Ethan's voice was steady. That's more valuable than any business degree. That's the thing I've been missing my entire life. Rosa was quiet, and Ethan could see her mind working through implications, possibilities, fears. Finally, she said, Can I think about it? Of course. Take all the time you need. He stood, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the last few days catch up with him. But Rosa, whatever you decide, thank you for reminding me that some people still choose kindness when no one's watching. That meant more than you know. She nodded and gathered her cleaning supplies, then hesitated at the door. Mr. Cross, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you really give us those cards? What were you looking for? Ethan thought about that question, the same question she'd asked in her apartment, but weighted differently now. I was looking for someone real, someone who wasn't performing for me or positioning themselves for the next opportunity, someone who would show me the truth even if the truth was uncomfortable. He smiled sadly. I found her. I just didn't expect her to be the person I'd been seeing every day without actually looking at. Rosa left without another word, but Ethan saw something shift in her expression. A recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding that invisibility was a choice she could unmake if she wanted to. He stood in his empty kitchen, drinking lawn-clipping juice and watching the city wake up below, and wondered what came next in a life that had suddenly become unrecognizable. The test was over. The answers were clear. Sloan was gone. Harper was reconsidering everything. And Rosa Hale, quiet, generous, extraordinary Rosa, had shown him a version of wealth he'd never considered, the kind that wasn't measured in dollars but in the number of lives you touched when you thought no one was counting. It was terrifying. It was also the first real thing Ethan Cross had felt in years. 3 days passed before Rosa gave him an answer, and in those 3 days, Ethan Cross discovered what it felt like to wait for something he couldn't buy, manipulate, or strategize into existence. He went to the office but found himself unable to focus on spreadsheets and projections that suddenly seemed like elaborate games played by people who'd forgotten what the stakes actually were. He sat in meetings and heard himself speak, confident, decisive, authoritative, while some part of his mind stood apart and wondered who this person was who could discuss quarterly earnings with such conviction while feeling completely hollow inside. Harper maintained perfect professional distance, arriving early and leaving late, executing her duties with flawless efficiency while carefully avoiding any moment that might become personal. She brought him coffee at exactly the right temperature, managed his calendar with surgical precision, and never once met his eyes for longer than necessary. It was like working with a highly advanced robot programmed to anticipate his needs while feeling absolutely nothing about fulfilling them. On the third morning, Ethan arrived at the penthouse to find Rosa already there, sitting on the couch in the living room instead of cleaning. She'd let herself in with her key, but hadn't touched her supplies. She was simply sitting, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serious. "I have an answer," she said when he closed the door behind him. Ethan's heart did something complicated in his chest. He set down his briefcase and crossed to sit in the chair across from her, maintaining the careful distance he'd learned she needed to feel safe. "I'm listening." Rosa took a breath. "I talked to my mother about your offer. She said I'd be crazy to turn down an opportunity like this. She said people like us don't get chances to work with people like you, and I should be grateful you even noticed me." Her voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of something fierce. "Then I talked to Mrs. Chen, my neighbor who I bought groceries for. You know what she said?" "What?" "She said, be careful of rich men who want to save you. She said they always think they're being generous, but what they really want is to feel good about themselves without actually changing anything that matters." Rosa's eyes met his directly. "She said rich people collect poor people like pets sometimes, proof that they care about the world without actually having to give up any of their comfort." Ethan felt that accusation land like a physical blow. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I don't know." Rosa's honesty was brutal and beautiful. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 3 days." "Are you asking me to help you change your life because you actually want to change? Or because watching me help my neighbors made you feel bad about yourself and you want to feel better without doing the hard work?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Ethan could have deflected it, could have given her the polished answer that would reassure her of his sincerity. Instead, he sat with the discomfort of her suspicion and asked himself the same question. "I don't know either," he said finally. "I want to believe I'm sincere. I want to believe that seeing you choose people over money cracked something open in me that's real and permanent. But the truth is, Rosa, I've been wealthy and isolated for so long that I'm not sure I know how to actually connect with the world anymore. I might be performative. I might be using you to feel like a better person without actually changing. I don't know." Something shifted in Rosa's expression. Not approval exactly, but recognition, like his honesty had answered a question she hadn't asked out loud. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay. Okay, I'll help you, but not as your employee, and not as your project." She straightened her spine, and Ethan saw steel underneath her gentle demeanor. "If we're doing this, we're doing it as partners, equal partners. That means you don't get to make all the decisions. That means you listen when I tell you something isn't working. That means you treat me like someone who has something valuable to contribute, not like a charity case you're fixing." Agreed. Ethan felt something like hope rising in his chest. "What else?" "I keep my apartment. I don't move into your world and leave mine behind. The people in my neighborhood, they're my community. They're the reason I understand what actually matters. If I lose that connection, I lose the thing you're asking me to share with you." She paused. "And I don't want your money. I want fair compensation for my work, but I don't want to become rich. Because the moment I do, I stop seeing the world the way the people I'm trying to help see it." Ethan studied her face, this woman who was turning down wealth with the same conviction most people pursued it. "You're afraid becoming rich will change you." "I've seen it happen." Rosa's voice carried the weight of experience. "My cousin married a lawyer, moved to the suburbs, started shopping at stores where everything costs more than my monthly rent. Within 2 years, she stopped coming to family gatherings because they weren't sophisticated enough. She forgot where she came from, Mr. Cross, and she calls it success." "Ethan," he said gently, "if we're partners, you need to call me Ethan." She nodded slowly. "Ethan, my point is, I need to stay grounded in the life I came from, or I can't help you understand it. Does that make sense?" "More sense than anything I've heard in years." Ethan stood and extended his hand. "Partners then, equal voices, fair compensation, and you keep your apartment and your community." Rosa stood and shook his hand, and Ethan felt the calluses on her palm from years of cleaning other people's homes. It was the most honest handshake he'd experienced in a decade. "When do we start?" she asked. "Now," Ethan said. "Today. Because I have no idea what I'm doing, and I need someone to show me how to actually see the world I've been living in without looking at." Rosa smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "Then put on different clothes? You can't walk through my neighborhood in a suit that costs more than most people's cars. You'll scare everyone." 20 minutes later, Ethan Cross walked out of his penthouse wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt that he'd found in the back of his closet from some long-ago weekend when he'd pretended to be casual. Rosa looked him up and down and shook her head. "The jeans are fine, but that shirt still screams money. The fabric's too nice. Hold on." She disappeared into the small room off the kitchen where the household staff kept their things and returned with a worn gray t-shirt. "This is my brother's. He left it here last time he visited. Put it on." Ethan changed in the bathroom and emerged wearing a shirt that had been washed so many times the fabric was soft as silk, but looked like it belonged to someone who worked for a living. Rosa nodded approval. "Better. Now you look like a person instead of a billboard for wealth." She headed for the door. "Come on, we're taking the subway." The subway? Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd taken public transportation. 10 years? 15? "The subway," Rosa confirmed. "Because if you want to understand how most people actually live, you need to travel the way they travel. No private cars, no drivers, just you and a million other people trying to get somewhere." The subway was a revelation. Ethan had forgotten about the heat, the press of bodies, the way strangers navigated shared space with elaborate courtesy born from necessity. He watched Rosa move through the crowd with practiced ease, holding the pole as the train lurched forward, her expression serene despite the chaos around them. A mother with 2 small children struggled with a stroller near the door. Without hesitation, Rosa moved to help, holding the door while the woman navigated the awkward step down to the platform. The mother smiled gratitude and Rosa smiled back. A whole conversation happening in silence, 2 women recognizing each other's struggle and offering help without expecting anything in return. "You see that?" Rosa said quietly as they exited the station. "That's what community looks like. People helping people because we all know how hard it is." They emerged in Queens, in Rosa's neighborhood, where the buildings were old and the streets were crowded, and everything smelled like a dozen different cuisines cooking simultaneously. Ethan felt profoundly out of place and strangely alive, like he'd stepped through a door into a world that had been running parallel to his own, without him ever noticing. "First stop," Rosa said, leading him down a block where small shops crowded together like old friends. "Mrs. Chen's building. I want you to meet her." Mrs. Chen lived on the 3rd floor of a walk-up that reminded Ethan of Rosa's building. Old, tired, but maintained with the kind of care that suggested people still believed in dignity even when resources were scarce. Rosa knocked 3 times, a rhythm that was clearly familiar, and the door opened to reveal a tiny elderly woman with sharp eyes and a suspicious expression. "Rosa, you didn't tell me you were bringing a man, Mrs." Chen looked Ethan up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "Mrs. Chen, this is Ethan. He's a friend. I wanted him to meet you, if you have a few minutes." Mrs. Chen stepped back from the door. "Come in then, but take off your shoes. I just mopped." The apartment was immaculate and impossibly small. One room that served every function, organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly where every possession belonged because there was no room for disorder. Photographs lined one wall, generations of family captured in fading color. A small altar in the corner held fresh flowers and burning incense. "Sit," Mrs. Chen commanded, gesturing to a worn couch. "I'll make tea." "You don't have to," Ethan started, but Rosa shook her head slightly. "Let her. Refusing tea is insulting." They sat while Mrs. Chen moved around her tiny kitchen with the efficiency of decades of practice. She returned with 3 cups of jasmine tea and settled into a chair that seemed to be molded to her exact shape. "So," she said, fixing Ethan with those sharp eyes, "you're the one who gave Rosa the card." It wasn't a question. Ethan glanced at Rosa, who shrugged slightly. "I told her everything. Mrs. Chen doesn't believe in secrets." "I gave her the card," Ethan confirmed, "along with 2 other people. I wanted to see what they would do with unlimited resources. A test. Mrs. Chen sipped her tea. Rich people love tests. Makes you feel smart, figuring out who deserves your generosity. The accusation was direct enough to sting. That's not... Let me finish. Mrs. Chen's voice carried authority despite her size. Rosa told me what she did with your money. Bought me groceries and medicine I needed, helped the community center, got shoes for Maria's daughter, barely spent anything on herself except some flowers. She paused. You know what that tells me? What? That Rosa is a better person than you'll ever be, and you know it, and it makes you uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen's smile was sharp. So now you want her to teach you how to be good. Like goodness is a skill you can learn instead of something you practice every day, even when it costs you. Ethan felt his face flush. With respect, Mrs. Chen, you don't know anything about me. I know you had to test people to figure out who was real. I know you're sitting in my home wearing borrowed clothes because you think dressing down makes you one of us. I know you're rich enough to give away unlimited money, but lonely enough to need someone to tell you you matter. Mrs. Chen set down her tea. I know plenty, young man. The apartment was silent except for the sound of traffic outside and someone's radio playing music in another unit. Ethan wanted to defend himself, to explain that it was more complicated than Mrs. Chen was making it sound. But sitting in this small, immaculate room, drinking tea with a woman who saw through him completely, he found he couldn't argue with her assessment. You're right, he said quietly. About all of it. Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. At least you're honest. That's something. She turned to Rosa. You think you can help this one? I don't know, Rosa said, but I'm going to try. Mrs. Chen stood, signaling the end of the visit. Then be careful, Rosa. Rich people's problems are expensive to solve, and they expect you to fix them without asking them to give up anything that matters. As they left the building, Ethan found himself shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the shock of being seen so completely by someone who owed him nothing and expected even less. She's intense, he said. She's honest. Rosa started walking down the street. That's what you said you wanted, right? People who would show you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Yeah. Ethan followed her. I just didn't expect the truth to be quite so brutal. Welcome to my world. Rosa stopped at a small market where produce spilled out onto the sidewalk in colorful abundance. This is where I buy groceries. I want you to shop with me. The market was chaos. Vendors calling out prices, customers haggling, children weaving between adults, the smell of ripe fruit and fresh bread, and something frying in oil mixing in the warm air. Rosa moved through it like water, greeting vendors by name, comparing prices, selecting vegetables with care. Ethan watched her negotiate with the produce vendor, a rapid conversation in Spanish that resulted in Rosa getting 3 tomatoes for the price of 2 because she'd mentioned his daughter was doing well in school and Rosa had helped her with homework last month. Value wasn't just measured in money here. It was measured in relationships, in history, in the accumulated goodwill of small kindnesses exchanged over time. How much did you spend? Ethan asked when they left with 2 bags of groceries. $18. Enough for a week if I'm careful. Rosa handed him one of the bags. In your world, $18 is nothing. A cup of coffee at the right cafe. Here, it's survival. And the difference between having enough and going hungry often comes down to whether someone decides to give you 3 tomatoes for the price of 2 because you helped their kid with math. They walked to the community center next, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and windows covered in children's artwork. Inside, the space was pure controlled chaos, kids everywhere, ranging from kindergarten age to teenagers, supervised by 2 exhausted-looking women who brightened when they saw Rosa. Rosa, thank God, we're drowning here. The older woman, Maria, Ethan learned, pulled Rosa into a quick hug. The art supplies you bought are in the back room, but we can't find the scissors, and the kids are doing that thing where they get creative with paste and... She stopped, noticing Ethan. Who's this? This is Ethan. He's helping me with a project. Rosa didn't elaborate and Maria didn't push. What do you need? For the next 2 hours, Ethan Cross, who ran a company worth billions, who made decisions that affected thousands of employees, who had been featured in Forbes and Fortune and Time, helped organize art supplies, and refereed arguments between 8-year-olds about whose turn it was to use the good markers. He cleaned up spilled paint and helped a girl with her homework and listened to a teenager explain with passionate intensity why the basketball hoop outside was positioned wrong and needed to be moved 3 feet to the left. It was exhausting. It was chaotic. It was completely unstructured and impossible to control. And Ethan found himself more present, more engaged, more genuinely useful than he'd felt in months of running his company. "You're good with kids," Rosa observed as they walked home in the gathering dusk. "I had no idea what I was doing." "That's why you were good with them. Kids can tell when adults are performing versus when they're actually paying attention. You were paying attention." She paused at a street corner, waiting for the light. "That's what this whole thing is about, Ethan. Not money, not strategy. Just paying attention to what's actually in front of you instead of what you think should be there." They rode the subway back to Manhattan in companionable silence, and when they emerged near Ethan's building, the contrast was jarring. The gleaming tower, the marble lobby, the doorman in his crisp uniform, it all seemed like set dressing for a play about wealth, impressive but fundamentally hollow. "Thank you," Ethan said as they stood outside his building. "For today. For showing me all of that. We're just getting started." Rosa's expression was serious. "Today was the easy part, visiting my world, meeting my people, seeing how things work when resources are scarce. The hard part comes next." "What's the hard part?" "Figuring out what you're actually willing to give up to make a difference. Because real change doesn't happen from a distance, Ethan. It doesn't happen by writing checks and feeling good about your generosity. It happens when you give up something you value, something that costs you, something that actually changes how you live." Rosa met his eyes. "Are you ready for that?" Ethan thought about his penthouse, his company, his life of careful distance and strategic relationships. He thought about Sloane's yacht party and Harper's networking lunches, and the way he'd been surrounded by people for 15 years without ever feeling less alone. He thought about Mrs. Chen's sharp assessment and the kids at the community center, and Rosa spending $18 on a week's worth of groceries while he dropped thousands on a single suit without thinking about it. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I want to find out." Rosa nodded slowly. "Then tomorrow, we start the real work. Meet me at my apartment at 8. And Ethan? Don't wear the expensive jeans. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty." She left him standing outside his building, and Ethan rode the elevator up to his penthouse, feeling like he'd crossed some invisible border into territory he didn't understand and couldn't map. His phone buzzed with messages, board members wanting decisions, investors requesting calls. Harper's perfectly organized summary of tomorrow's schedule. The machinery of his life continuing to run with smooth efficiency while he stood in his empty home and wondered what it would feel like to actually live inside his own life instead of managing it from a distance. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and stood at the window looking down at the city below, at the lights spreading out in all directions, millions of people living lives he knew nothing about. Somewhere down there, Rosa was in her small apartment, probably helping a neighbor or calling her mother, or doing any one of 1,000 small things that mattered more than all his wealth and success combined. His phone rang. Harper's name flashed on the screen. "Yes? Mr. Cross?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "I wanted to let you know I've decided to stay, if the offer is still open." Ethan turned from the window, surprised. "It is. But Harper, why? I thought you were considering other opportunities." A long pause, then quietly, "Because you were right. I've spent 3 years being strategic and efficient and always thinking 3 steps ahead, and I'm tired. I'm tired of performing competence. I'm tired of treating every relationship like a chess move. I'm tired of being so focused on the next opportunity that I never actually arrive anywhere that feels real." Her voice wavered slightly. "I don't know how to be different yet, but I want to learn. If you're still willing to work with someone who's figuring it out." Ethan felt something tight in his chest loosen. "I'm figuring it out too, Harper. We can figure it out together." "Okay." She sounded relieved. "I'll see you tomorrow then." "Harper?" Ethan stopped her before she could hang up. "What's your favorite color?" A surprised laugh. "What?" "Your favorite color. I realized I've worked with you for 3 years and I don't know. Another pause, then softer. Blue, deep blue, like the ocean at night. Thank you for telling me. Ethan smiled. See you tomorrow. He hung up and stood in his quiet penthouse, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Cross felt something that might have been hope. The test had revealed the truth. Sloane was gone. Harper was staying but changing, and Rosa, extraordinary, honest, challenging Rosa, was going to show him how to see the world with new eyes. It wouldn't be easy. Mrs. Chen had been right about that. Rich people's problems were expensive to solve, and real change required giving up things he valued. But standing at his window, looking down at the city full of people he'd never seen despite living among them his entire life, Ethan found himself ready to pay that price. Whatever it cost, it had to be worth more than the loneliness of living at the top of the world without anyone to share the view. The next morning arrived with rain, the kind of cold October downpour that turned New York's streets into rivers and made every commute miserable. Ethan stood outside Rosa's building at 7:55, wearing jeans that had actually seen wear and a jacket he'd bought years ago for a camping trip he'd never taken. Water dripped from his hair, and he was already regretting not bringing an umbrella, but something about showing up prepared felt like cheating. Rosa opened the door at exactly 8 o'clock, took one look at him, and laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, the kind that came from genuine amusement at another person's expense. You look like a drowned cat. I didn't want to be late. You could have waited in the lobby. She stepped aside to let him in. Come on. You need coffee before we start. Her apartment felt different in daylight, still small, still impeccably clean, but warmer somehow. Morning light filtered through the single window, illuminating the photographs on the wall, the handmade quilt, the small altar in the corner with fresh flowers that Ethan now knew cost $12 and represented a deliberate choice to bring beauty into a space that had very little room for anything unnecessary. Rosa handed him coffee in a chipped mug that had "World's Best Mom" printed on the side in fading letters. That was my mother's, she said, seeing him notice. She gave it to me when I got my own place. Said I'd earned it by taking care of everyone else for so long. Ethan cradled the mug carefully, aware that he was holding something with history, with meaning that had nothing to do with its monetary value. Where's your mother now? She lives 2 blocks away. You'll meet her later. Rosa poured her own coffee and sat at the small table that served as dining room, desk, and workspace. But first we need to talk about what happens next. Because what I'm going to show you today isn't pretty, Ethan. It's not a community center with cute kids or a market with friendly vendors. It's the part of poverty that people like you never see because it's too uncomfortable to look at. I'm ready. You say that now. Rosa's expression was serious. But let me be clear about something. Once you see what I'm going to show you, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to your penthouse and pretend the world is the way you thought it was. And you can't fix it with money, at least not the way you're used to fixing things. Are you sure you want to know? Ethan thought about turning back, about saying this was too much too fast, about retreating to the comfortable distance of his previous life, where poverty was statistics and charity was tax-deductible donations to causes he never witnessed firsthand. Then he thought about the last 2 weeks, the black card test, Sloane's yacht party, Harper's networking lunches, the crushing realization that he'd built a life of perfect isolation and called it success. Show me, he said. They left the apartment and walked through streets that grew progressively more worn with each block. Buildings here weren't just old. They were failing, with boarded windows and crumbling facades that suggested landlords who'd given up on maintenance because the tenants couldn't afford to complain. People hurried past with their heads down, focused on survival rather than community, and Ethan felt the absence of the warmth he'd experienced in Rosa's neighborhood the day before. This is the other side of Queens, Rosa said quietly. The part that doesn't make it into the articles about gentrification and urban renewal. The part that gets left behind when the money moves in. She stopped in front of a building that looked one strong wind away from collapse. There's a family on the 3rd floor. Father lost his job 6 months ago when the factory closed. Mother works 2 jobs, but it's not enough. They have 4 kids and they're 2 months behind on rent. The landlord filed eviction papers last week. Can we help them? With what? Money? Rosa's tone wasn't cruel, just realistic. You could pay their back rent, sure, but what happens next month? And the month after that? And what about the 100 other families in this building in the same situation? How many people can you save before you run out of money or attention or the will to keep fighting a problem that's bigger than any one person's generosity? The question felt like a trap, but Ethan recognized it for what it was, a test of whether he understood the difference between charity and change. You're saying individual help isn't enough. I'm saying individual help is necessary but not sufficient. You can pay someone's rent and feel good about yourself, but unless you address why they can't pay their own rent, the factory closing, the lack of jobs, the cost of housing that's completely disconnected from what people actually earn, you're just putting Band-Aids on a wound that needs surgery. Rosa started walking again. That's what I need you to understand before we go any further. Real change is systemic. It's complicated. It's expensive in ways that have nothing to do with money, and it requires you to give up the fantasy that you can be a hero who saves everyone. They walked in silence for several blocks, and Ethan processed what she was saying. He'd built a career on solving problems, identifying inefficiencies, implementing solutions, measuring results. But poverty wasn't inefficient, it was structural, and solving it would require more than strategic thinking and unlimited resources. Rosa stopped at another building, this one slightly better maintained. This is where Maria lives, the woman from the community center whose daughter needed shoes. I remember. Her husband died 3 years ago. Heart attack at 42 because he'd been working 80-hour weeks trying to save enough money to move the family somewhere safer. She's raising 3 kids alone on a waitress salary and whatever tips she can earn. She's one emergency away from losing everything. Rosa turned to face him. I want you to meet her. Really meet her, not as a charity case or a problem to solve, as a person with dignity and dreams and a whole life that's just as valid as yours, even though she'll never have a fraction of your resources. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, and Rosa knocked with that same distinctive rhythm. Maria opened the door with a baby on her hip, and exhaustion etched into every line of her face. When she saw Rosa, relief flooded her expression. Thank God. I was just about to call you. She stepped back from the door. Isabella's running a fever and I can't miss work, but I can't take her to the babysitter like this, and I don't know what to... She stopped, noticing Ethan. Who's this? My friend Ethan. He's helping me with something. Rosa moved into the apartment with the ease of someone who'd been here many times before. Let me see Isabella. The apartment was tiny and cluttered in the way that spaces get when too many people live in too little room with too few resources to organize properly. Toys spilled across the floor. Dishes were stacked in the sink. A basket of laundry sat unfolded on the couch. But underneath the chaos, Ethan could see the same care he'd noticed in Rosa's apartment and Mrs. Chen's. The photographs arranged on one wall, the children's artwork taped to the refrigerator, the small touches that insisted on dignity even in difficulty. Rosa felt the baby's forehead and frowned. She's burning up. When did this start? This morning. I gave her children's Tylenol, but it's not helping. Maria's voice cracked slightly. I can't afford the emergency room copay right now. I used all my emergency money last month when the car broke down. But if I miss work today, I might lose my job. And if I lose my job, you're not going to lose anything. Rosa's voice was calm and certain. I'll stay with Isabella. You go to work. We'll handle this. Rosa, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Rosa took the baby gently. Go. We've got this. Maria left with tears in her eyes and gratitude in her voice, and Rosa turned to Ethan with the baby nestled against her shoulder. Welcome to reality. This is what poverty actually looks like. Not dramatic or photogenic, just exhausting and relentless and full of impossible choices between bad options. What can I do? Right now, go to the pharmacy down the street and get infant Tylenol, the kind that works faster, and some Pedialyte. And she pulled cash from her pocket and handed it to him. Use this, not your card, not your money, mine. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to say he could afford it, wanted to throw money at the problem until it went away. But he saw the look in Rosa's eyes and understood this was another test. He took the cash and went to the pharmacy, and for the first time in his adult life, Ethan Cross stood in line at a drugstore counting bills and hoping he had enough to cover the purchase. He did, barely. The clerk counted out his change, $2.37, and Ethan pocketed it with a strange sense of accomplishment. This was what Rosa had been trying to show him. Every purchase was a calculation. Every dollar spent was a dollar that couldn't be spent on something else. And the margin between having enough and not having enough was razor thin and terrifying. When he returned to the apartment, Rosa had the baby in a lukewarm bath, trying to bring down her fever. "Did you get it?" "Yes." Ethan handed her the bag and watched as she dried Isabella carefully, dosed her with medicine, and wrapped her in a soft towel. The baby whimpered but didn't cry, and Rosa began singing something low and soft in Spanish while rocking her gently. "That's what my mother used to sing to me," she said quietly, "when I was sick or scared or just needed comfort. It doesn't mean anything profound, just a song about the moon and stars and how the world is big, but you're safe right here." Ethan watched her with the baby and felt something crack open in his chest. This was care. Not the transactional kind he was used to, services rendered in exchange for payment, but the real kind that cost time and attention and pieces of yourself that you gave because the alternative was watching someone suffer alone. They stayed with Isabella for 6 hours while Maria worked her shift. Rosa knew how to handle a sick baby with the competence of someone who'd done this before, checking her temperature, keeping her hydrated, monitoring for warning signs that would require actual medical intervention. Ethan felt useless at first, but Rosa put him to work washing bottles, cleaning up toys, folding the laundry that had been sitting on the couch. "This isn't glamorous," he said, folding tiny shirts with careful precision. "No," Rosa agreed, "but it matters. Maria comes home to a clean apartment and a baby who's feeling better, and she doesn't have to choose between her job and her child. That's what mutual aid looks like, Ethan. People helping people with whatever they have, whether it's money or time or just the willingness to show up." When Maria returned at 3, Isabella's fever had broken and the apartment was clean, and she walked into her home to find 2 people who'd spent their day making her life fractionally less impossible. She cried, and Rosa hugged her, and Maria insisted on making them dinner, even though she was exhausted and probably wanted nothing more than to collapse on her couch. They ate rice and beans and chicken that Maria had cooked with the kind of skill that comes from making limited ingredients stretch to feed a family. It was simple, and it was delicious, and it was served with such genuine hospitality that Ethan felt humbled by the generosity of someone who had so little giving so freely to someone who had so much. "Thank you for helping Rosa today," Maria said to Ethan. "She's always taking care of everyone. It's good she has someone taking care of her for once." "I'm not," Ethan started, then stopped. Because the truth was complicated. He wasn't taking care of Rosa. Rosa was taking care of him, showing him how to see the world through different eyes. But maybe that was its own kind of care. They left as the sun was setting, and Ethan felt physically and emotionally exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with running a company or making high-stakes decisions. This was a different kind of tired, the kind that came from witnessing suffering you couldn't fix, and helping in ways that felt inadequate but were all you had to offer. "That was hard," he said as they walked back toward Rosa's apartment. "That was Tuesday," Rosa replied. "That's what I do most weeks, helping Maria or Mrs. Chen or someone else in the building who's in crisis. That's what community means. Not the pretty version you see in advertisements. The real version where people are struggling and you show up anyway because the alternative is letting them struggle alone." They reached Rosa's building, and she turned to face him in the fading light. "So here's my question, Ethan. You've seen it now. The real thing. The part that doesn't get better with money or strategy or good intentions. The part that requires you to actually show up, repeatedly, for people who can't give you anything in return except the knowledge that you helped. Can you do that? Not once or twice when it feels meaningful, but consistently. Even when it's boring or hard or you're tired or you have 100 other things that seem more important." Ethan thought about his schedule. The board meetings, the investor calls, the strategic planning sessions that filled every hour of every day. He thought about how he'd structured his entire life around being busy, around being important, around being needed in ways that came with clear metrics and measurable outcomes. And he thought about 6 hours spent rocking a sick baby and folding laundry and achieving nothing that would show up in a quarterly report. I don't know, he said honestly. I want to say yes, but the truth is, I don't know if I can sustain this. I don't know if I'm built for the kind of care that doesn't come with recognition or results or any proof that it matters. Rosa nodded slowly. At least you're honest. That's more than most people manage. She paused. But here's what I've learned, Ethan. You're not built for anything. You make choices every day about who you want to be and what you want your life to mean. And those choices accumulate into a person. Right now, you're a person who's built a fortune and surrounded yourself with comfort and maintained perfect distance from anything that might actually touch you. But you could choose to be someone different. You could choose every single day to show up for people who need help. Not because it feels good, or because it makes you a hero, or because it proves something to anyone, just because they need help and you're capable of giving it. That sounds exhausting. It is. Rosa's smile was sad. But it's also the only thing that's ever made me feel like my life has purpose. Helping Mrs. Chen get her groceries, watching Maria's kids while she works, teaching teenagers at the community center that someone cares about them. It's small and it's endless, and it doesn't fix the structural problems that created the need in the first place. But it's real, and it matters to the specific people I help. And that has to be enough, because the alternative is doing nothing and calling it wisdom. They stood in the cooling evening air, and Ethan felt the weight of the choice she was describing. He could go back to his penthouse and his company and his life of comfortable distance. He could donate to charity and feel good about his generosity and never have to sit with a sick baby or watch someone choose between paying rent and eating. Or he could choose differently. He could show up, repeatedly, even when it was hard and boring and felt inadequate. He could become someone who helped instead of someone who managed helping from a distance. I need time, he said finally, to process all of this, to figure out what I'm actually capable of committing to. Take your time. Rosa headed for her building entrance. But Ethan, while you're processing, remember something. People don't have the luxury of taking time to figure things out. Maria's baby gets sick whether you've processed your feelings about poverty or not. Mrs. Chen needs her medication whether you've decided you're ready to help or not. The world doesn't wait for rich people to feel comfortable with discomfort. She left him standing on the street, and Ethan walked to the subway station feeling like he'd been taken apart and reassembled slightly wrong. Everything looked the same but felt different. The people around him weren't just crowds anymore. They were individuals with lives as complex and difficult as Maria's, with struggles he'd never considered and resilience he'd never had to develop. He rode the subway back to Manhattan and emerged into his neighborhood where everything was clean and expensive and carefully maintained to create the illusion that suffering didn't exist if you had enough money to insulate yourself from it. The contrast was jarring. 6 hours ago, he'd been in an apartment where a sick baby represented a crisis that could cascade into job loss and eviction and homelessness. Now he was walking past restaurants where appetizers cost more than Maria's weekly grocery budget. Harper was waiting in his office when he arrived, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with concern. "You missed the board meeting." "I know. Marcus covered for you, said you were dealing with a personal matter." She paused. "Are you okay?" Ethan sat down heavily in his chair and realized he had no idea how to answer that question. Was he okay? He'd spent the day confronting the gap between his life and the lives of people who lived 20 minutes away but might as well have been on another planet. He'd held a sick baby and folded laundry and paid for medicine with cash. He had to count carefully to make sure he had enough. He'd seen poverty not as a statistic, but as a daily reality for people who worked harder than he ever had and would never have a fraction of his security. "No," he said finally. "I'm not okay. But I think maybe I'm starting to understand what okay could look like if I made different choices." Harper sat down across from him, and for the first time since their confrontation, she looked at him without the careful professional distance she'd been maintaining. "What happened today?" So he told her. About Rosa's neighborhood and Mrs. Chen's sharp wisdom and Maria's impossible choices. About 6 hours spent caring for a sick baby while her mother worked to keep a job that barely paid enough to survive. About the crushing realization that his wealth, his enormous, ridiculous wealth, existed alongside poverty that was equally enormous and far less ridiculous. I don't know what to do with this information, he admitted. I can't fix structural poverty. I can't change the system that creates the need. But I also can't go back to pretending I don't see it now that Rosa's shown me what's actually there. Harper was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What if you didn't try to fix everything? What if you just helped the people right in front of you, the way Rosa does?" Rosa asked me the same thing, if I could show up consistently, even when it's hard or boring or feels inadequate. Can you? I don't know. Ethan looked at Harper, really looked at her, seeing past the efficient assistant to the person underneath. Can you? What? Come with me tomorrow, to Rosa's neighborhood. Meet the people she helps. See what it's actually like to care about something that doesn't advance your career or position you for the next opportunity. His voice was gentle but challenging. You said you wanted to learn how to be different. This is how. Not through strategy or planning or thinking 3 steps ahead. Through showing up and helping even when there's no clear benefit to you. Harper's expression cycled through surprise, uncertainty, and something that might have been fear. I don't know anything about helping people like that. Neither do I. Ethan smiled slightly. But we can learn together, if you're willing. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city the way Ethan had so many times over the past weeks. When she turned back, her expression was resolved. What time tomorrow? 8. Meet me at this address. Ethan wrote down Rosa's building on a piece of paper. And Harper, don't wear anything you can't get dirty. After she left, Ethan sat alone in his office and felt the weight of what he was choosing. This wasn't a one-time gesture or a charitable donation he could write off at tax time. This was a commitment to show up repeatedly for people who couldn't give him anything in return. It was choosing discomfort over distance, connection over control, presence over performance. It was terrifying. It was also the first thing that had felt genuinely meaningful in longer than he could remember. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. How are you doing? He typed back, overwhelmed, confused, uncertain if I can actually do this. Her response came quickly. Good. That means you're starting to see clearly. Most people never get past the comfortable lies they tell themselves about the world. You're further along than you think. Ethan stared at that message for a long time. Then he stood, gathered his things, and went home to his penthouse, where he sat in expensive silence and tried to imagine what his life might look like if he actually became the person Rosa seemed to believe he could be. Someone who showed up, someone who helped, someone who chose people over comfort, even when it cost him everything he'd spent 15 years building. The choice was his to make, and for the first time, Ethan Cross was ready to make it. Harper Knox arrived at Rosa's building at 7:45 the next morning, wearing jeans she'd owned for 5 years but never actually worn, and a plain sweater that had been a gift from a colleague she barely remembered. She looked uncomfortable in casual clothes, like someone wearing a costume for a role they hadn't rehearsed, and when Ethan met her at the entrance, he saw his own uncertainty reflected in her careful expression. I'm not sure why I'm here, she admitted. Neither am I, Ethan said, but I think that's the point. Rosa opened her door with coffee already brewing and that assessing look that suggested she'd known exactly what kind of morning this would be. She studied Harper for a long moment, taking in the expensive jeans that had never seen actual wear, the designer sweater worn like armor, the rigid posture of someone who'd spent years learning to take up as little space as possible while maintaining maximum control. You're the assistant, Rosa said. See, not a question. Executive assistant, Harper corrected automatically, then caught herself. Sorry, yes, I work for Ethan. Worked, Ethan interjected gently. We're trying something different now. Rosa handed them both coffee and mismatched mugs and gestured for them to sit at her small table. Before we go anywhere today, I need to know why you're both actually here. Not the polite version, the truth. Harper glanced at Ethan, but he shook his head slightly. This was her answer to give. I'm here because I don't know how to be a person anymore, Harper said finally, her voice stripped of its usual professional polish. I know how to be competent. I know how to be strategic. I know how to position myself for success and manage other people's expectations and execute tasks with perfect efficiency. But I don't know how to just be someone who helps without calculating the return on investment, and I'm tired of being a machine that looks like a woman. The honesty hung in the small apartment like something fragile and newly born. Rosa nodded slowly. Okay, that's real. She turned to Ethan. What about you? I'm here because I spent 15 years building a fortune and losing my humanity in the process. I'm here because I gave 3 women unlimited resources to find out who they were and discovered I didn't know who I was. I'm here because Rosa showed me what it looks like to choose people over comfort, and I want to learn how to make that choice consistently instead of just once when it feels meaningful. Ethan met her eyes. And I'm here because I'm lonely in a way that money can't fix, and I'm finally ready to admit that. Rosa sipped her coffee, considering them both. This isn't going to be easy. What I do, what I'm going to teach you, doesn't come with instructions or guaranteed outcomes. Some days you help someone and it matters. Some days you help someone and it doesn't matter at all, or it matters for a while, and then circumstances overwhelm whatever good you did. You're going to fail. You're going to feel inadequate. You're going to want to quit and go back to your comfortable lives where poverty is someone else's problem. But, Ethan prompted, but if you stick with it, if you show up even when it's hard, you'll learn something that money can't teach you. Rosa stood and pulled on her jacket. You'll learn what it feels like to be part of something bigger than yourself. Not because you're important or powerful or wealthy, just because you're present and willing and human. Ready? They spent the morning at the community center, but this time Rosa put them to work in ways that stripped away any illusion of heroism. Harper found herself cleaning bathrooms with industrial cleaner that made her eyes water while listening to Maria explain how she managed to get her kids ready for school, pack lunches, and get to work on time every morning with no car and no margin for error. Ethan spent 2 hours trying to fix a broken heater with tools he barely knew how to use, while a teenager named Marcus explained with patient condescension that rich people always thought problems could be solved if you just tried hard enough, when the real problem was that the heater was 20 years old and needed to be replaced, but there was no money for replacement. So what do you do? Ethan asked, his hands covered in grease and his ego thoroughly bruised. You patch it. You make it work for another month, another winter, another year until it finally dies completely, and then you figure something else out. Marcus handed him a wrench. That's what poverty is, Mr. Cross. Not dramatic suffering. Just constant problem-solving with inadequate resources and no safety net. By noon, Ethan's back ached and his hands were dirty, and he felt more useful than he had in any board meeting all year. Harper emerged from the bathroom looking exhausted and slightly manic, her carefully styled hair falling out of its clip, her expensive sweater stained with cleaning solution. I cleaned a toilet, she said to Ethan, like she was announcing a revolutionary discovery. I cleaned 6 toilets, and you know what? It matters. The kids have clean bathrooms now. That's not strategic. That's not positioning myself for anything. I just cleaned toilets and it mattered. Rosa, overhearing, smiled. Welcome to the revolution. It's not glamorous, but it's real. They took lunch at a small Dominican restaurant where the owner knew Rosa by name and insisted on giving them extra food because Rosa had helped her daughter with immigration paperwork the year before. The meal cost $12 total and was more satisfying than anything Ethan had eaten at his usual restaurants where individual dishes cost 10 times that amount. This is what mutual aid looks like, Rosa explained between bites. I help Carmen with paperwork. She gives me extra food. I help Mrs. Chen with groceries. She watches my apartment when I'm away. Maria needs childcare. I provide it. She shares her dinner with me. None of it involves money. All of it involves showing up for each other consistently. But it's not scalable, Harper said, and Ethan heard her strategic mind trying to find the pattern, the system, the way to replicate this across larger populations. You can't help everyone this way. No, Rosa agreed, but I can help the people in front of me. And if everyone helped the people in front of them, maybe we wouldn't need to scale. Maybe we'd just have communities again instead of isolated individuals trying to solve structural problems alone. They spent the afternoon visiting people Rosa knew, Mrs. Chen, who needed help setting up her new phone, a family whose electricity was about to be shut off, a teenager who needed someone to practice a college essay with because her parents didn't speak English well enough to help. Each interaction was small. Each one mattered. And slowly, Ethan began to understand what Rosa had been trying to teach him. This wasn't about saving anyone. It wasn't about being a hero or fixing everything or even making a significant dent in the massive structural problems that created poverty in the first place. It was about showing up consistently for the people whose lives intersected with yours. It was about recognizing that wealth wasn't just money, it was time, attention, skills, connections, and the willingness to share all of it without expecting anything in return. By the time evening arrived, Ethan was physically exhausted and emotionally raw in a way he hadn't experienced since he was young and still believed the world could be understood through effort. Harper looked similarly undone, her professional composure completely abandoned in favor of something more genuine and uncertain. "I need to show you both something," Rosa said as the sun began to set. "One more thing before today ends." She led them to a building Ethan recognized, the one where Maria lived, where he'd spent 6 hours the day before with a sick baby. But instead of going to Maria's apartment, Rosa led them to the roof, a flat space littered with old furniture and clotheslines where laundry snapped in the evening wind. "This is where people come when their apartments are too small, too hot, too full of other people," Rosa said, walking to the edge where a low wall provided the only barrier between the roof and the 6-story drop to the street. "This is where teenagers come to do homework when there's no quiet space at home. This is where mothers come to cry when they don't want their kids to see them break. This is where the community gathers when someone dies, or someone's born, or someone needs to talk about something too big for their small apartments." She gestured to the cityscape spreading out before them, not Manhattan's gleaming towers, but Queens' sprawling density, millions of people living close together, their lives intertwined by proximity and necessity, if not by choice. "You asked me what you could do, Ethan. You asked how someone with your resources could make a difference that mattered." Rosa turned to face them both. "The answer isn't to save everyone. The answer is to be present, to show up. To see the people you've been looking past your entire life and recognize that their struggles are just as real as yours, even if the numbers are different." "That feels inadequate," Harper said quietly. "We have so much. Surely we should be able to do more than just show up." "Why?" Rosa's question was gentle but challenging. "Why does your help have to be bigger than everyone else's? Why can't you just be another person in the community, contributing what you can, when you can, because that's what community means? You don't have to be saviors. You just have to be present." Ethan stood at the edge of the roof looking out at the city he'd lived in his entire life and finally began to see clearly. All these years he'd been trying to matter by being exceptional, building wealth, making deals, achieving success that would prove he was significant. But standing on this roof with Rosa and Harper, covered in the day's grime and exhausted from physical labor that had accomplished nothing impressive, Ethan felt more significant than he had in years, because he'd shown up, because he'd helped even when the helping was mundane, because for one day he'd been present in other people's lives instead of distant from his own. "What happens now?" he asked Rosa. "That's up to you." She crossed her arms against the cooling evening air. "You could go back to your life. Keep the company running, make your money, donate to charity, and feel like you've done your part. Or you could choose something different. You could restructure your life around presence instead of performance. You could use your resources not to save people, but to support the communities that are already saving themselves. You could stop trying to fix things from a distance and start showing up consistently for the people right in front of you." "What would that actually look like?" Harper asked. "Practically speaking, we still have jobs, responsibilities. We can't just abandon everything to clean toilets full time." "No one's asking you to," Rosa smiled. "But you could choose to live closer to the people you want to help. You could restructure your work schedule to include regular volunteer time. You could use your business skills to help community organizations operate more efficiently. You could invest in the neighborhood instead of extracting value from it. You could bring people like Maria and Mrs. Chen into your world instead of treating this world and that world as completely separate." She paused. "The point isn't to give up everything. The point is to stop using your resources as insulation from humanity and start using them as bridges toward connection." They stood in silence as the sun finished setting and the city lights began to glow against the darkening sky. Ethan thought about his penthouse, his company, his life of perfect isolation. He thought about the black card test that had revealed how completely he'd lost touch with what actually mattered. He thought about Sloane's superficial affection and Harper's strategic loyalty and Rosa's quiet refusal to become someone other than who she was, even when offered unlimited resources. I want to change things, he said finally. Not just my schedule or my donation habits. Everything. The way I live, the way I work, the way I measure what makes a life meaningful. He turned to Rosa. But I can't do it alone. I need help. Your help. As a partner, like we discussed. Someone who can keep me honest when I start to drift back toward comfortable distance. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we start a foundation. Not the traditional kind where rich people throw money at problems from a distance. A different kind. One that's run by people from the communities we're trying to support. One that focuses on mutual aid and connection instead of charity and distance. Ethan's voice gained certainty as the idea took shape. I'll provide the initial funding and the business infrastructure. You'll provide the community knowledge and the relationships and the understanding of what actually helps versus what just makes wealthy people feel good about themselves. And Harper, he turned to her, you'll provide the organizational skills to make sure we're actually effective instead of just well-intentioned. Harper's expression cycled through surprise and calculation before landing on something that looked like cautious hope. You're serious. Completely serious. You said you're tired of being a machine that looks like a woman. This is how you become human again. We all become human again together. Rosa studied them both with that penetrating gaze that saw through performance to truth. This isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to give up things you value. Time, certainly. Comfort, absolutely. The fantasy that you can help without being changed by the helping. The illusion that success looks like having more instead of needing less. She paused. Are you ready for that? Ethan thought about his question to Sloane about his favorite book, about how she couldn't answer because she'd never bothered to know him. He thought about Harper's networking lunches and strategic positioning that had left her competent but disconnected. He thought about Rosa spending $12 on flowers and calling it a luxury while he'd spent thousands without thinking. Yes, he said, I'm ready to be changed. Me too, Harper added quietly. I don't know how to do this yet, but I want to learn. Rosa nodded slowly, and Ethan saw something shift in her expression. The recognition that this moment was real, that these people standing on this roof with her were actually committed to showing up and doing the work even when it was hard. Okay, she said, then we start tomorrow. But tonight, you both need to meet my mother. She's been asking about the mysterious rich man who gave me a black card, and I've been avoiding the conversation because I wasn't sure how it would end. Now I am. They climbed down from the roof and walked 2 blocks to a building nearly identical to Rosa's, and Rosa led them to a first-floor apartment that opened to reveal a small, vibrant space filled with the smell of cooking and the sound of telenovela playing softly on a television. An older woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, and when she saw Rosa, her entire face illuminated with love so pure it was almost painful to witness. Mija! She pulled Rosa into a hug, then noticed Ethan and Harper. And you brought friends. Sit, sit. I just finished dinner. There's plenty. Mama, this is Ethan Cross and Harper Knox. Ethan is the one who gave me the card I told you about. Rosa's mother, Carmen, she insisted they call her, studied Ethan with the same assessing gaze her daughter had. But where Rosa's assessment was analytical, Carmen's was maternal and somehow more penetrating. So you're the one testing people to see if they're real, she said in accented English. My Rosa told me everything. Sit down, we need to talk. They sat at a table that was slightly too small for 4 people, and Carmen served them rice and beans and chicken with vegetables. Simple food prepared with such care that every bite tasted like love made tangible. As they ate, Carmen told stories about raising Rosa and her siblings in this neighborhood, about the struggles and the small triumphs, about watching her children grow up American while trying to hold on to the culture she'd brought with her from the Dominican Republic. Rosa was always like this, Carmen said, gesturing at her daughter with obvious pride, always bringing home stray cats and sad children and neighbors who needed help. When she was 8, she gave away her new shoes to a girl at school whose shoes had holes, came home barefoot, said she didn't need them as much. Carmen's eyes grew misty. I was so angry. We'd saved for those shoes. But Rosa just looked at me with those serious eyes and said, "But Mama, her feet were cold." What could I say to that? Rosa looked embarrassed. "Mama, they don't need to hear." "Yes, they do." Carmen turned to Ethan. "You want to know if my daughter can teach you how to be good? She can't, because being good isn't something you learn like a skill. It's something you choose every day, even when it costs you, even when it hurts, even when no one's watching and you won't get credit." She paused. "But she can show you what those choices look like, and then you have to decide if you're brave enough to make them." The dinner lasted 3 hours, and by the end, Ethan felt like he'd been thoroughly examined and tentatively accepted into something he didn't fully understand but desperately wanted to be part of. Harper looked similarly moved, her usual guardedness completely dissolved in the face of Carmen's no-nonsense warmth and Rosa's quiet strength. As they prepared to leave, Carmen pulled Ethan aside and spoke quietly enough that the others couldn't hear. "My daughter has a good heart. Too good sometimes. People take advantage of that." Her grip on his arm was surprisingly strong. "You seem sincere, but I've lived long enough to know that sincerity isn't enough. Rich people always start out sincere. Then they get uncomfortable or busy, or they realize that real change requires giving up power, not just money, and they disappear." She looked at him directly. "Don't disappear on my daughter. If you're going to do this, commit. Be present. Show up even when it's hard. Because Rosa will show up for you even when it costs her everything, and she deserves people who will do the same for her." "I will," Ethan promised. "I won't disappear." "We'll see," Carmen said, but she smiled as she released his arm. They left the apartment and walked back toward the subway station through streets that now felt familiar instead of foreign. Harper was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the evening, and when they reached the platform, she turned to Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I'm going to quit," she said. Ethan's heart sank. "Harper, not quit working with you. Quit being your assistant." She smiled slightly. "If we're really doing this foundation, if we're really trying to build something different, I can't do it while also managing your calendar and organizing your life. I need to commit fully to this, to learning how to be present instead of strategic, to showing up for people who can advance my career. Are you sure?" "No." Harper's laugh was shaky. "I'm terrified. Being your assistant was the only thing I knew how to do well. But I'm more terrified of staying the same forever, so yes. I'm quitting, effective immediately." Ethan pulled her into a hug, and after a moment of surprise, Harper hugged him back. When they separated, both of them had tears in their eyes. "Welcome to being human," Ethan said. "It's uncomfortable, but worth it." Over the next 6 months, everything changed. Ethan restructured his company, promoting from within and stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on the foundation he was building with Rosa and Harper. He moved out of his penthouse, not all the way to Queens, but to a smaller apartment in a neighborhood where people actually lived instead of just storing their wealth. He learned to take the subway without thinking about it, to shop at markets where he had to calculate whether he could afford the good produce, to measure success not in quarterly earnings, but in relationships built and maintained. Harper transformed in ways that surprised everyone, especially herself. She brought her organizational genius to the foundation, but learned to apply it in service of community needs instead of corporate efficiency. She volunteered at the community center twice a week, teaching business skills to teenagers who wanted to start their own companies. She learned to cook from Carmen and to clean without resentment from Rosa and to show up consistently even when the work was mundane and the results were invisible. Rosa became the bridge between Ethan's world and her own, translating between the language of wealth and the language of community, keeping them all honest when they started to drift toward comfortable abstractions instead of uncomfortable presence. She insisted on fair compensation but refused to become wealthy, maintaining her apartment and her connections to the neighborhood even as her influence grew. She showed them, repeatedly, what it looked like to choose people over comfort, presence over performance, connection over control. The foundation they built together wasn't revolutionary. It didn't solve poverty or fix structural inequities or change the fundamental systems that created the need for their work, but it provided resources to community organizations already doing the real work. It hired people from the neighborhoods they served. It measured success not in dollars distributed, but in relationships built, trust established, dignity maintained. Marcus, who'd been skeptical at first but came around when he saw Ethan's commitment, helped them navigate the business and legal complexities. Maria became their community liaison, bringing lived experience to every decision. Mrs. Chen joined their board and kept everyone grounded with her sharp assessments of what would actually help versus what would just make wealthy people feel good about themselves. Ethan's mother, Caroline, flew in from Boston when she heard what her son was doing, expecting to find a midlife crisis or a breakdown. Instead, she found a version of her son she hadn't seen since he was young, engaged, present, genuinely content in ways that wealth had never achieved. She stayed for a week, volunteering at the community center and meeting Rosa and Carmen and slowly understanding what had changed. "You're happy," she said to Ethan on her last evening, like she was announcing a miracle. "I'm present," he corrected, "which I'm learning might be the same thing." The moment that brought everything full circle came 18 months after the black card test. Rosa invited Ethan to dinner at her apartment, just the two of them, she specified, no Harper or Marcus or anyone else. He arrived to find the small space transformed, with candles on the table and music playing softly, and Rosa looking nervous in a way he'd never seen before. "What's all this?" he asked. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for showing up, for not disappearing, for becoming the person I hoped you could be instead of giving up when it got hard." "Rosa, I should be thanking you. You changed my entire life." "We changed each other." She gestured for him to sit. "That's how real relationships work. Not one person saving another, but both people showing up and being changed by the showing up." They ate dinner, simple food that Rosa had cooked with care, and talked about the foundation, about the community center's expansion, about plans for the future. But underneath the practical conversation was something else, something that had been growing quietly over 18 months of working together and showing up for each other and learning what it meant to be present in each other's lives. When Rosa reached across the table and took his hand, Ethan felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, "and I need you to hear it without making it into something more than it is. Okay? I'm falling in love with you, not because of your money or your resources or what you can give me, despite all of that, actually. I'm falling in love with who you've become over these months, someone who shows up, someone who helps, someone who's willing to be changed by the people around him instead of trying to change them." She paused. "But I'm scared, because I've seen what happens when people from your world and people from my world try to build something together. The differences are real. The power imbalance is real, and I don't want to be another woman who loses herself trying to fit into a life that was never meant for her." Ethan turned her hand over in his, looking at the calluses that still marked her palm despite months of different work. "I'm scared too, because I've been lonely for so long that I don't trust my own feelings. I don't know if I love you or if I love the version of myself I become when I'm with you. I don't know if what we have is real or if it's just two people who needed each other at the right moment. So what do? We keep showing up," Ethan said simply. "We take it slow. We stay honest. We let Harper and Carmen and Mrs. Chen keep us accountable when we start to drift into comfortable lies. We build something real instead of something performative." He smiled. "And we remember that love isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to figure them out together." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me. I learned from the best." They kissed then, carefully and tentatively. Two people who'd been transformed by proximity and presence, learning what it meant to let someone else in without losing themselves in the process. It wasn't the fairy tale ending where the billionaire and the housekeeper lived happily ever after. It was something more complicated and more real. Two people choosing each other while remaining themselves, building a relationship based on presence and honesty instead of wealth and performance. 5 years later, Ethan Cross stood in a community center that bore Rosa's name, a compromise they'd reached after she insisted it shouldn't bear his, watching their daughter play with other children whose parents represented every point on the economic spectrum. The foundation had grown beyond anything he'd imagined that night when he handed out 3 black cards, but it remained grounded in the principles Rosa had taught him: presence over performance, community over control, showing up consistently even when the work was hard. Harper ran the foundation now with Rosa as co-director, and they'd built a team that reflected the communities they served. Maria's oldest daughter worked as a program coordinator. Mrs. Chen's grandson handled their technology needs. Marcus had left Cross Industries to become their CFO, bringing corporate discipline without corporate distance. Ethan still consulted for his old company, but most of his time was spent here, teaching business skills, mentoring entrepreneurs from underserved communities, showing up consistently for people who taught him that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of your connections and the breadth of your willingness to help. Rosa appeared beside him, their daughter's jacket in her hands, and leaned against his shoulder with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd learned to be present in each other's lives without performing for an audience. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The black card test. How I thought I was testing 3 women to see who was real, but I was actually testing myself. And I failed spectacularly." "You didn't fail." Rosa's voice was gentle. "You learned. That's different. I learned that the person I'd built myself into was hollow, that success without connection is just expensive loneliness, that the woman I'd been seeing every day without noticing was the only one actually living a life that mattered." He turned to look at her directly. "I learned that some people choose kindness when no one's watching, and those are the people who change the world without even trying." Their daughter ran over, demanding attention, and they gathered her up between them. She had Rosa's eyes and Ethan's stubborn determination and Carmen's sharp honesty, and she was growing up in a world where wealth and poverty weren't separate planets, but overlapping communities where people helped each other not because it was strategic, but because it was human. That evening, they walked home through streets that had become familiar over 5 years of presence, greeting neighbors by name, stopping to help carry groceries or admire a child's new bicycle, or simply be present in the ordinary moments that made up a life actually lived instead of just managed. The penthouse was gone, sold years ago to fund the foundation's expansion. In its place was a home, messy, crowded, filled with photographs and children's artwork, and the accumulated evidence of a life built on connection instead of isolation. Harper came for dinner, bringing stories about the foundation's latest project and her own tentative relationship with a teacher from the community center who saw past her competence to the person underneath. Carmen was already there, teaching their daughter to make empanadas while dispensing wisdom disguised as cooking instructions. Mrs. Chen arrived with fresh flowers. Always flowers now, because Rosa had taught them all that beauty mattered even when resources were scarce. They ate together around a table that was too small for the number of people, but perfect for the amount of love. And as Ethan looked around at these faces that had become family through choice rather than obligation, he finally understood what he'd been searching for all those years when he'd tested people with black cards and unlimited resources. He'd been searching for this, for belonging, for presence, for the knowledge that he mattered not because of what he could buy, but because of who he showed up as, consistently, even when it cost him everything comfortable. The black card test had revealed the truth, that Sloan had loved his resources more than his person, that Harper had valued strategy over connection, and that Rosa had understood something fundamental about humanity that wealth had allowed him to forget. But more than that, the test had revealed Ethan to himself, a man who'd built a fortune and lost his soul, who'd surrounded himself with people and died of loneliness, who'd measured success in dollars when the only currency that mattered was presence. He'd given 3 women unlimited power and watched what they chose. Sloan had chosen performance. Harper had chosen ambition. Rosa had chosen everyone but herself, and in doing so, had shown Ethan that the truest form of wealth wasn't in accumulating resources, but in giving them away to the people right in front of you who needed them more. Now, 5 years later, Ethan Cross was no longer a billionaire living in a penthouse. He was a father sitting on the floor with his daughter, a partner building a life with a woman who taught him to see clearly, a friend showing up consistently for people who'd learned to trust that he wouldn't disappear, a human being finally present in his own life instead of managing it from a distance. The black card test had ended, the real work had begun, and in the small moments of an ordinary evening, helping with homework, cleaning up dishes, sharing stories with people who knew him not for what he'd built, but for who he'd become, Ethan Cross finally understood what it meant to be wealthy in the ways that actually mattered. He belonged. He was present. He was home. And that he'd learned through Rosa's patient teaching and his own hard-won transformation was the only fortune that ever lasted.